nature out. So they work with nature. Their traditional house forms acknowledge the fact that they will be displaced, they will probably have to move. So this is a situation when the flood comes in. So you're still safe, but you'll probably have to move in time. So it's really this sort of embedded sense of resilience, because you are respecting what nature is going to do to you and not fighting it. And within that resilience, you take out moments of celebrations and despite the hardships that life kind of throws at you. So both kind of operate in harmony, in symbiotically. There is a resilience towards everyday struggles that we still have to make in these rural communities, but that resilience also gives you a sort of resolve and your creative spirit, that you're able to, with limited means, with limited resources. Every different part of India, every different village has a different way of expressing and embellishing and ornamenting with limited means and limited resources their house forms. Be it in Gujarat, these are in Jharkhand and Bihar in the Hazaribagh area with Santhal communities, and these are beautiful forms of self-expression with very, very little but a high amount of creativity involved. To when you move to tribal communities, again in Gujarat, and you see the Pithora paintings and embellished onto your humble home, so to say. And that again transcends down, percolates to every aspect of your being. Your house, your textiles, what you wear, the jewelry that you wear, it all kind of percolates. And the other thing which is again embedded within rural landscapes is this idea of harmony and tolerance. And rural resilience springs from the fact, and I think Kutch is a very good example for that, that in spite of Gujarat having one of the lowest, sort of 9% state ratio of Hindu-Muslim population demographic diversity, Kutch has 21% of the minority community, and hence it has always been a land which where harmony and tolerance did thrive, because both communities are facing the same sort of issues, but they have different expressions to respond to it. And so just the way you have Bandhani and the Kutchi embroidery, you also have the Ajrak block printing, which comes from the Khatris of Kutch, which is a very, very refined, very, very evolved block printing technique. Moving to continuity of the arts itself across geographies, and the resilience as balancing the need of traditional crafts with modernity. This is an example from the Durga Puja carnival that happens here, and how Chandanagar lighting crafts have now kind of being modernized to become kinetic, animated sort of. So there's also this idea of you have to balance what you have traditionally with modernizing them to some degree to be relevant today. So finally, I'm just going to talk about some elements of threat, risks, and actions, and link it up to this whole idea of rural-urban boundaries. Because as we know, we cannot deny it that our urban greed is now expanding in such a way that our rural landscapes are not vulnerable. They are not bereft of our need to expand into them for various resources that they give us, and what are the ways in which maybe some local engagement can take place or is taking place for rural communities to remain resilient. So the first thing we need to identify within that is really the ecological footprint that all of us have today in our world. And if you see those three bands of green, yellow, and orange, the orange is really what the ecological footprint of low-income communities. And the yellow is middle-income countries, and the green is all the developed world, so to say. So you really begin to see this imbalance in ecological footprint vis-a-vis living index. And India is kind of yellow over here. So we are still in the middle band, but countries like North America, Canada, Australia, they're all enjoying, we are suffering their ecological footprints. But also this whole aspect of migration, which we cannot avoid anymore. And classically, the nature of migration, global migration that is taking place today, is one of the main reasons of this sort of imbalance. If you traditionally look at what were the traditional centers of migration, which are in yellow, you see the dark red, which are the new aspirational centers for international migration. And India, and especially this spine here on the north to west to south edge, figures prominently on that whole new aspirational migration, which is beginning to impact our resources and our rural landscapes. And if we are to go by these kind of urban transformation studies and metrics, by 2030, we think that about 40 to 70% of India's population will be living in cities. So the tier 1 cities are anyway saturated. Tier 2 and 3, which are kind of on rural urban boundaries, will also evolve into mega cities. So what that is beginning to do and is really impact our natural resources. The rocky outcrop will not remain rocky anymore, and this is already happening in North Karnataka, in the Hampi area. There's a lot of illegal mining which is happening in the Bellary and Hospet area. There's a loss of natural water bodies and therefore increased soil erosion, which begins to imbalance the entire ecosystem. I'm just giving a couple of examples. The second, of course, we all know, is the concretization of the hills. And one of the main reasons Shimla faced the kind of water crisis it did last year, that they had to tell tourists to leave because there was just no water in the town anymore. And this is today, with the availability of concrete and the building of highways. We think highways is a great indicator of development, but highways and that connectivity also allows us to take all these modern materials to the remotest of areas, who, due to its economies of scale, change their traditional building practices into this. It's also aspirational in some way. And then we are not cognizant of the seismic conditions there, or we have more landslides, and all of this begins to collapse. And last 2-3 years, we've been seeing this every year with Uttarakhand and Kedarnath, and every place in Himachal is suffering from this. And closer home, if we just look at Calcutta and its outskirts today, the way in the last 10 years we've really eaten into the peri-urban or the rural sort of areas. So what used to be, all the yellow is what used to be rural, and now it's peri-urban. The orange is what is still Kolkata Municipal Corporation area. The light orange was the expanded boundaries as we understand Greater Calcutta today. So all the Rajarhat, Domdom, Panihati, and the yellow is what used to be under panchayat. So it was basically a village, and hence they were governed by panchayats. But today the yellow has also gotten engulfed into the rural-urban fringe, the way the city is developing. And this is one study of the Shonarpur Panchayat, which has all been done by KMDA. So these studies exist in terms of impact and assessment of what we are really doing in our need for development. So Shonarpur is somewhere here in this southern fringe. And if you see some of these studies, just 3 studies will tell you what has happened here between 1999 and 2010. So in just about 10 years, these 2 diagrams on the right tell you built up area. So from a very sparsely built up Gram Panchayat, you have this dense red pixels, and now the Panchayat land is entirely, Shonarpur is built up. Same with the green. That was the amount of green cover that the area had, and now how that is depleted. Same with the water bodies, because if you kind of you close up all the pukurs and the dobas, then this is what you get. So these are sort of studies, and this is only in 10 years. In 10 years, we've kind of lost 50 to 60% of resources, and this is just outside Calcutta. This is what we are doing to our city every day. So really now kind of closing on the heritage cycle itself, because this whole conversation about heritage awareness stems from the fact that if we understand, then we will begin to value. If we value, then we will begin to care. And if we care, then the future generations will also be able to enjoy it, and then it becomes a sort of cycle which repeats. And hence, even occasions like this allow us to have one step in that direction, to build a sort of awareness, and really understanding that this cannot come from any top-down way. It is the community that has to take charge and do this. So I have this one last example. Can I go through it? Okay. So I'm just now going to talk about an example that I was involved in. This is in Mumbai. So and I'll end with this. And though it's not traditionally a rural landscape, but these were the original settlers of Mumbai. And Bombay continues to have many such different koliwaras along the coast, which is basically the kolis, the traditional fishing communities, which therefore continue to maintain those lands, and they're called as gauthans, which are urban villages. And they have an independent sort of governance as well. So what has happened to the Koliwara, and why we started working there with an NGO that I was working with in Bombay 2 years back, is to really understand that now. So this is the Bandra side of the sea link. So the Bandra-Worli sea link runs from here, and this is the Mahim Bay. So the Worli Koliwara is really a triangular piece of land which juts into the bay, and you can see it very prominently when you're on the sea link. It used to be a traditional settlement where fishing used to be their mainstay, their urban livelihood, but today it's gone down to about 20%. So only 20% of the Koliwara's livelihoods come from fishing, because the government of Maharashtra has made such policies which allow larger trawlers and sort of fishing to supersede the traditional fishermen. And therefore they don't want their second and their third generation to continue with fishing, but rather get an education, move out of the Gauthan and have white collar jobs. But what is really interesting is when you kind of understand how even today the sort of local knowledge and the resilience of these fishing communities, and how they look at the culture and nature as an integrated life cycle, their understanding of the sea, the water, the tides, when to fish, when not to fish. And we try to map this on this sort of cycle, where if you see the inner core, which follows the Gregorian calendar from January to December, and then the seasons from spring to summer, and how they relate to the outer ring, which is our lunar calendar, and how they map their festivals and the fishing cycle is very, very integrally related. So in the monsoon, so in about July and August is when they stop fishing, and they kind of pack up their boats. They have a huge festival called Anniversary for Apparition of Our Lady Fatima, because she is known along with the goddess Velankani. They are the sea goddesses who are protectors. So they do one large grand festival at that time, and then they start preparing for the next season. They repair their boats, they get into that sort of a mode, but they don't go out into the waters to fish. That is for two reasons. One is, of course, the high monsoon, so it's not safe, but it's also the time when the breeding season happens, and there are certain kinds of fish that come into the intertidal zone or they go out. So there is this sort of very strong understanding and linkage. And then again, at the end of August, with this festival called Narali Purnima, just at Shravan, when the Hindu calendar we follow Shravan, the Kolis have this very specific festival called the Narali Purnima, after which you kind of go into the seas again. And there are there is this great intrinsic understanding of the biodiversity, the fish that is your primary source of livelihood, and that knowledge, that embedded wisdom does not change just because over the years you continue to live in Mumbai, or that those dynamics don't change. So we had done this very interesting study with the Koli community to really look at the character of the Gauthan. And if I don't tell you this is Bombay, and if you don't see the skyline in the background, you will think that this is any traditional Indian village, and they have somehow managed to hold on to those qualities. But unfortunately, this is their dwelling and their sacred space. If you look at the commons, the community commons, what is common land along the coast of where they live, it's one of the saddest conditions of solid waste management and litter. So what happens when you move away from a rural setup to an urban setup? Why do these things start changing? So we had done a study to map all of this, how much solid waste was getting produced. We were working with the BMC. But then what we also did was education and awareness programs for the community itself. And they really become the primary stakeholder in a rural context where we can only be the guides and the facilitators. So with the children of the Koliwada, with the women of the Koliwada, we did these sort of awareness programs that then led to, we kind of made the children of the village waste warriors so that they could bring about a sort of awareness change in their parents, in their siblings, to not litter, to not throw around. And then we did an entire cleanup with women and NGOs of the Koliwada. So this is a small thing that I wanted to just share, as there are many of our urban conditions today which are also at this cusp of rural becoming urban, urban extending into rural. So how does all of that, how do we begin to recognize and work with these sort of conditions? Thank you.
You started with the global scenario, went to the national level, and then came to the very local, even to Shonarpur and things. And then, of course, you had this very lovely example of the Swachh Varali Koliwada, which fits in very well with this fortnight, which is being celebrated as the Swachh Bharat Pakwada. Swachh Pakwada from 16th to the 30th of this month. I've seen a banner, yeah, over there outside also. So I'm sure there are many questions or comments. So yes, please go ahead. Would I get a microphone then? And I'm sure you will take these questions. You can maybe answer them here. You may shut this down a little bit so that it doesn't guard your pretty face that much. Yeah.
Can I ask?
Yeah, go
Hello.
ahead.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am, for presenting us such a wonderful lecture. I have two questions. Okay, the first is, since I was going through your Bombay case studies, not only Worli, then Khar Road is there, Versova, many, Kolaba, many are there. I think you have also done the case studies. So my first question is, how are these folk reciprocating to your educational campaigns?
That's one
That's
question.
This is
you want to tell me the second
Okay,
question?
and the second question is, what's the quality of reciprocation with respect to that? Means not only these rural landscapes, this rural landscape is just one chapter of all the niche elements that the world is encountering. Okay, so if someone wants to make a career in these niche elements, not only rural landscape, there are many heritage, culture. So what are the prospects and consequences standing in 2019? These are my two questions.
Okay, very, thank you for very short questions. Usually questions are never so short. People tend to formulate their questions in a winded way, you see, but thank you very much. It was well formulated.
Okay,
Like
so your first question for how do these communities itself respond to such concerns. So I can tell you with the Koli community, at least in Bombay, there are two things. One is because they look at there's a huge level of pride and identity because they look at themselves as the original habitats of that place before the Portuguese came or before anything happened to Bombay, right? So because of that, there's a huge sense of identity and pride with the place. But somehow there is also a great degree of reluctance to admit to these as being problems. looking at littering or waste management or any of these being things that they need to do, or they need to start at their home before expecting the municipal corporation or anybody else to come and do something for them. That is where the real challenge is the mindset shift or the conditioning. So one of the other things other than waste is also open defecation, which is still a very important issue over there. If you go along the sea link every morning, you will see people from the community. The BMC has built toilets for them. They don't use it because either they so that's where the mind and education comes in. They still look at toilet cannot be a part of the house, so there are unused toilets in the Koliwada. So that is where the education comes in, that before we give them free waste bins, that's not going to change the problem. This is the sort of education and awareness, which is why we targeted the kids, because the kids are now going to school, to municipal school. So you kind of follow a bottom-up approach and making them conscious about these things. Your second question of prospects? Heritage in general. Okay. No, so I mean, I think now in 2019, the world has opened up for heritage. Even 10 years back, I would say, when I was studying, when I was considering my options for professional sort of pathways, conservation and the varied layered way in which we understand heritage conservation was really not there. It was conservation. If you want to do conservation, you're going to preserve monuments, probably. And the conversation did not go beyond monuments. There's a lot that has happened since. So.
Okay. All right. So your questions have been answered adequately. Yes, there's another question. Can move up there. Of course, on your chart over there, the open defecation line was also very clearly demarcated.
Yes.
And in that context, your kind of remark of bottom up is also very significant.
Thanks, Kamalika. Very, very interesting presentation. Thanks for that. You had some very good data points, right? You had the 5%